Hey guys, Montel here, and welcome to this edition of Let's Be Blunt with Montel, where we try to give you as much information as we possibly can to help you navigate this unbelievably daunting landscape of cannabis that's available out there in every state and every different way you can think of. And my guest today has an incredible story. He lost almost 70 pounds and transitioned off of almost 19 different prescription medications, including some opioids, for an array of different medical conditions after he started consuming and growing cannabis. After experiencing such an incredible benefit for himself, he decided he wanted to do all he could to help others through the power of cannabis and the cannabis plant. He is the co-founder of AlpineStash, a premier Colorado craft cannabis grow. And I'm so glad we have him here with us today. So please welcome Mr. Danny Murr-Sloat. Danny, thanks so much for being here with us today, buddy.
Thank you, Montel. It's a pleasure to be here.
Sure. Let's start a little bit. Let's start with where this really began for you. What were some of the conditions that you were dealing with that started you using cannabis, and why cannabis? What made you decide, yeah, let me try this?
Yeah, so 2 weeks after I turned 21, I had some really bad stomach pain that landed me in the hospital for 5 days. They couldn't really figure out what was going on. When they released me, they just gave me a script for Vicodin. I started taking that daily and followed that up with doctor's appointments, trying to figure out what was going on.
I'm sorry, and they never told you what the problem was?
They couldn't figure it out at that time, so they sort of were like, well, you're doing better, you're in pain, so here's some Vicodin, and follow up with your doctors to try to figure out what's going on, which I did. And I got every test that they could do, colonoscopies, all sorts of x-rays, scans, MRIs, that type of thing. Couldn't figure out what was going on. So eventually the gastroenterologist suggested that I see a neurologist and a physiatrist. So, nerve doctor and a pain doctor. When I went and saw that the physiatrist in the first appointment, this was about, 6 or 7 months after I had been discharged, his answer was like, well, we don't know what's going on. We'll try to figure it out. But, I would like to control your pain a little bit. So, here, try this medication, which turned out to be fentanyl. Today, with the opioid crisis, there's a lot of information about fentanyl. But back then, this was, 15 years ago, 16 years ago, I didn't even know what it was. So I transitioned from Vicodin to fentanyl, both in the immediate release form of the lollipop and in a patch form. I spent the next number of years, trying to get tests, trying different procedures. They had decided that it was some nerve problem in my back that was sort of transferring to my stomach. So, I got like nerve ablations, steroid injections, pulse rate frequency, all sorts of different therapies and treatments to try to fix what was going on. The whole while I was on fentanyl, and I began to experience side effects, which required me to take more medication, and then side effects from those medications, which was, there was other medications to treat that. And after a little while, I was in a pretty big medical stupor. During that time frame, I did develop a nerve impingement problem in my neck, which I do attribute to the opioid uses. And for your listeners, if you've taken chronic opioids, you begin to have, very deep, almost coma-like sleep. And I don't think I was tossing and turning. I was just, sleeping for 16 hours, in one position that began to impinge the nerve to my arm and my neck. Series of surgeries to clear that up. In that time frame, I also had a non-cancerous basal skull tumor. So, by the age of 29, I was pretty sedentary. I spent most of my time either going to doctor's appointments or just in bed. I had gained a ton of weight, and like you guys said, I was on, 19 different prescriptions and just really pretty hopeless. At that time, it was 2009. Medical cannabis was becoming more accessible to the general public, at least in Colorado. And my dad actually suggested that I try that, sort of out of desperation. And I did. And that's where my journey with cannabis began.
And you had never used cannabis before that, or you hadn't been a cannabis user before that?
Yeah, I mean, I had smoked in high school. The part of the country I'm from, born and raised in Boulder, Colorado, is very liberal. Cannabis was available and around, and I had smoked in high school and experimented a little bit. But after that, I had had a few negative experiences, especially deep in my opiate kind of haze that just had turned me off to it. So I was actually hesitant to try it initially.
And let me ask you a question now. Throughout all that time that you were going back and forth to see doctors, you went through the back pain, the ligations, and all those things. Were you still experiencing the same stomach pain throughout that entire process?
Yeah, I was. And actually, I came to find out that a lot of times if you have chronic pain of an unknown origin, especially if it's muscle or nerve pain, the more opiates you take, and for the longer amount of time you take, the more pain that you're in, your body increases that pain signal. So I was experiencing the stomach pain. It would get better when I would, change an opiate or increase the dose for a little while, but then it would come back. And
And what
eventually,
a lot of people are starting to find out and have found out, and we know for a fact that opioids were never intended for long-term use, ever intended. They were originally designed for short-term, blockage of the pain receptor, so people would be able to get on without the memory, and then it would go away. But we got hooked up into just over prescribing this thing, and that's the reason why we have the opioid crisis that we have now. But go ahead.
yeah.
So you still experience the pain?
Oh yeah, and actually, as I began just in my life to sort of slow down because of, just being in such an opioid haze, 24/7, and as you know, over time that they increase the dose, and it's so, when you're in it, it's hard to see how it was any different. It's sort of like lobster in a boiling pot. By the time you're so deep in it, you don't even understand how much it's affected your life. But you begin to slow down. At least I did. Gain a bunch of weight. Stop moving. All of these things deteriorate your body, and will make any predispositions you have to joint or muscle pains. Either they'll bring it out or they'll make it much worse. That stagnation is terrible.
So your father suggested, well, you know what? You've been down this road, man. So it's time for you to try something different. You should try some medical cannabis. So did you seek out, cannabis that it was high in THC, high in CBD? How did you initially decide what you were going to try to titrate yourself with?
Yeah, so at that time in 2009, at least here, there wasn't really, we didn't have that testing available. We didn't have anything reliable. We did have dispensaries, and so I got my medical card. I didn't even know, there wasn't even really a good place to find listings of dispensaries. I went to one. It no longer exists, and it was across the street from Colorado University. I had a giant neon sign that said Dr. Reefer with an arrow. That's how I knew it was there, and that's where I went. And actually got really good advice, which was to follow your nose. I was very wary of, there was some literature, there was some, magazines and things like that. I was very wary of trying something that was known for, anxiety or paranoia, because those had been the issues that I had in the past. But the advice to follow your nose was the one that I took. Picked out a couple of different cultivars based on that and went from there.
Okay. And then so when you first started, you were smoking, eating, tinctures. What did you try?
Yeah, I first started smoking. Eventually, I tried some edibles once I got comfortable with smoking, but that's where I started. It was really, I don't know if there are still states. I'm assuming when states open up for medical usage, it was almost like the Wild West. There was like, people were making cookies in their kitchen and selling them to dispensaries, and there wasn't really measured, consistent product necessarily besides flour.
Okay. So then, all right. So how long after you started trying cannabis did you start to realize you were getting some relief?
I mean, it was pretty immediate. In the whole time frame, within 4 or 5 months, I had gotten off. I'd got myself off of all these different prescriptions. I had lost a bunch of weight, got back, more towards my normal self, and began to plug back into life. But in terms of from when I first tried it to when I began that process, was probably within a week. As soon as I felt actual pain relief, um, I I should say that my goal had been to get off. I wanted my life back. I was optimistic that it would happen, and I knew within my heart that it would. I just needed a tool to create the physical space and the emotional space to help me with that. And so I was already primed. I had already primed myself to get there. And when I found relief with cannabis, it was like a light switch turned on. It was like, oh, here's something that not only takes my pain away, but can also give me, the emotional space to begin to heal that way and to plug back into life. And I started cutting my opiate dosage down, almost immediately.
Well, a lot of people, wrongfully associate cannabis use with weight gain rather than weight loss. Now, do you think it was because of the fact that you made so many emotional improvements for yourself? It gave you an opportunity to really reflect on yourself and say, wait a second, I got to slow down the eating. I got to slow down. I mean, what really triggered the weight loss in you so quickly?
Yeah, well, I think that genetics had played a large part. I had always been fairly skinny growing up. When I began to take the opiates, just having such a sedentary lifestyle that, I mean, I was literally, in a given week, I probably spent, 4 days, either in bed or in front of a computer screen, straight. And then with, you know, people say cannabis gives you the munchies, but opiates, nothing compares to opiates for me at least. And then just being sedentary and depressed for sure. So the other thing that happened when I made my first medical cannabis purchase is I got a clone. I had always enjoyed gardening, and so I decided to try this. And as I began to find relief, I really focused my energy on growing. And I didn't know what I was doing, and I made a ton of mistakes. But one of them was, a giant. I had an indoor tent and a giant light, and that space was really hot. So actually moving, taking care of something, being in really like a hot room, was pretty physically exhausting for me, and that contributed to the weight loss for sure. But getting up, getting moving, getting positive, embracing life, all these things that cannabis had brought into my life, um, really is what did it, and certainly getting off medication.
And you got a clone of the particular strain that was giving you the most benefit.
No, actually, this guy gave away free clones, and it's kind of a funny story. He was one of the first to do this, and he was pretty scared of other people actually growing cannabis, so he gave away clones which hermaphrodited, produced male flowers, which would seed anybody else's room. So they're kind of, like undercover traps. When I did end up flowering them, it was terrible, and I had to move on to different cultivars that I could get my hands on. But that I had to start somewhere, and that was as good a place as any to start.
And then that got you hooked in the growing world, right?
Absolutely, and for me, that was as therapeutic as ingesting cannabis itself. Taking care of something that was alive, putting energy into it that would reflect back onto me in my healing journey, being physical, and really really finding that there was, a future for me and something that I could do that I was passionate about, and pursue that as a career was really, really rewarding. And it gave me, a reinforcement that I was on the right path, but also the drive to improve myself.
Well, how did the doctors respond? Your doctors, the doctors you have been seeing now for years, how did they respond to the fact that you were finally getting relief through something that they weren't prescribing?
Yeah, well, so the day that I had my medical marijuana doctor evaluation, I actually coincidentally had an appointment with my family doctor that I had been seeing since I was like 13. And they had more or less an intervention with me. I was about to get another surgery to fix uh, my nerve pain, and I don't know how much of it they believed that I was in. And they told me, either you're leaving this meeting and going to some sort of inpatient treatment center, we'll find you one where they do physical therapy and stuff like that. But they're in their mind, I think that they had thought that most of my pain issues were either made up or drug seeking behavior. So they said, either you do this or we're not seeing you anymore. And so I left that meeting very disheartened, and I understand that they were very frustrated with the situation. But I went from that meeting to my medical marijuana doctor evaluation, and I didn't see those doctors for 3 or 4 years after that. I eventually went back to that practice and saw a different doctor. And I'll never forget that first appointment when I was in the hall getting my weight checked. And my other doctor, my old doctor, walked past me. It looked like he had seen a ghost. I mean, he was just totally stunned and taken aback with such an improvement. And now when I go there, and since then, whenever I go see them, they ask me questions. They ask, you know, we have this patient. Do you think, how do you think I should introduce that to them? I mean, it was such a big improvement, through all the doctors that I had seen, that I became the person that they turned to for questions, and really, I think was, success story that they shared with other patients.
So, I mean, what prompted you to turn your activism and your own self therapy into a business? I mean, you were the co-founder of AlpineStash along with your wife. I mean, what really prompted you to say, "Well, I think I know enough now. I'm going to get into this as a business"?
Um, well, when I had spent so long without a drive or a goal or a passion, and I wanted so badly to do something with my life. And because I had had a negative mindset about cannabis before I used it medicinally for a while, and I found, how much it helped me, I thought, if I get really good at this, this is legit. And if I get really good at this, this can be a career for me. And this, and I always wanted to do something I was passionate about. I didn't want to just, have a career for the sake of having a career. And so I thought, I naturally have the desire to whatever I'm doing to do it the best that I can. And I thought if I devote myself to this and learn as much as I can, 4, 5, 6 years from now, I can make a life for myself, and I can make a career for myself that I find rich and rewarding, and I can bring the products that help me to other people. I can bring the knowledge that I found to other people, and it will be, emotionally, spiritually satisfying, and hopefully financially satisfying. And so I just directed everything I had, to that end.
So you developed your brand, which is Alpine Stash. Do you grow for a specific product that you put on other dispensary shelves, or do you provide raw cannabis to other dispensaries? Talk a little bit about your business.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're, very small craft grow. I own it with my wife. We have 2 full-time employees and 1 part-time employee. Everything we do by hand. We hand water, we hand trim, we cure in glass. We have a breeding program. We make our own unique cultivars, and these are all available. On our end, we're a wholesale grow, so we do sell to retail dispensaries, and that's how the public can pick them up.
Okay. And now you've been up and running. How's the business going? Is it going well?
Yeah, so we started we got licensed in 2014. We were able to start getting our plants in 2015, and it was definitely rough. I mean, we are a small company. We don't have a huge budget. I more or less had no idea what I was doing with business. My wife helped out a ton, especially with sales, which was huge for us. And really, as a team, we just slowly built the brand. And within the last year, it's really sales have really improved, and we've begun to take off. And actually now we're looking towards expanding. And we were in the process of doing that before COVID-19 hit, which just sort of slowed everything down to almost a standstill. So we're still moving towards that direction. It's just painfully slow. But we've really seen the emergence of an educated consumer base, and the demand for, truly connoisseur, high-end cannabis. Not just the demand for it, but the knowledge of what it is. So, people going in and not just necessarily buying the most expensive thing, or necessarily trusting a bud tender to steer them in the right direction, but actually knowing themselves, what good flower is. And that's been
And clearly your product or your plants are tested. So what's your range? Or do you try to grow products that are high in THC, high in CBD, specific strains, or what do you try to grow?
We do all of it. I mean, for us, as growers, variety is the spice of life. We really enjoy, doing new cultivars, especially since we breed, we create, but we grow everything from, 20 to 1 CBD cultivars all the way up to, very high THC, and we try to do a range. I mean, there are, uh, every cannabis user is unique and looking for something unique, and some of them are looking for high hitting THC strains. Some of them are looking for kind of more mellow, easygoing ones. Some of them are looking for, CBD medicinal ones, and really we try to have a good selection, and we try to just offer the highest quality product we can. And we know that there are people out there that will enjoy all of it.
Well, Danny, I got to take a little break. And for all of you who've been listening, we've been talking to Mr. Danny Murr-Sloat, who is a cannabis user entrepreneur himself, who got into the cannabis field for his own personal medical reasons and then turned it into a business to make sure he could help others. I'm going to take a little break, pay a couple bills, and we'll be back right after this. Well, you're listening to Let's Be Blunt with Montel, and thanks so much for joining us today. Our guest today is Mr. Danny Murr-Sloat, who is the co-founder of AlpineStash, a premier Colorado craft cannabis grow that is a wholesaler that provides cannabis to several of the dispensaries and a unique, take on the market because he is actually growing unique product to make sure he fulfills the needs of a lot of people who are looking for specific strains that they provide. So, Danny, again, thanks so much for being with us today, my friend.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a pleasure so far.
Some, we're listened to in, hopefully in all 50 states. And right now we only have 37 states in the District of Columbia or 36 states in the District of Columbia that have passed some sort of cannabis bill. So your product is only available right now in Colorado. Is that correct?
That is correct. And as far as I know, while there are brands that have branched out nationally, there is no national distribution. It's still federal fenced across state lines.
Sure, you'd have to end up establishing your brand in each individual state with a product that's grown in each individual state. Do you envision yourself expanding your business that way?
I mean, I would love to do some form of that. I feel like we've been really slow to grow. We want to make sure that we build a solid foundation and really have everything in place to make sure that we are successful. And I feel like sooner or later there will be able to be national distribution, and that's probably if we're available. We're so small that we even in Colorado we often sell out of whole harvests and hours. Like I said, my wife Kristen does sales, and she's just amazing at it. And so, I mean, if there is national distribution and we are able to supply outside of Colorado, I mean, we certainly would love to. Um, who knows if there's opportunities to expand our brand's presence in different states? But right now we're just focused on doing the best that we can do in our current market.
And in the current market, what do you think is going on where right now? Again, you talk a little bit about the difficulties you've run into because of COVID-19.
Yeah, I mean, initially when COVID-19 started, and the lockdown started, there was a rush of people to purchase cannabis. People that were going to be sheltering in place or staying home, and it was a booming time for the dispensaries, for the storefronts. But on the wholesale side, our customers were the stores were so panicky. Nobody knew if they were going to stay open, how that was going to look. That really prices dropped for us, and so it's been a bit of a difficult time. We've been really having to be really penny wise, and it's like I said earlier, we have been we've been doing an expansion, but that's really slowed down. We had hoped to have that up and running, fully built out, up and running by June or July, and now we're looking at next January. However, overall, we were deemed an essential business, which is an amazing point in and of itself, and we have been able to keep going. We have a big enough facility, but a small enough crew that we're able to social distance and follow all those guidelines. And so overall, we really feel that we're lucky that while we did take a bit of a financial hit, we're able to survive and keep going. And now we're seeing the market kind of raise back up again. And so, we feel like we're in a good place, and we're just happy that we stayed open.
You've seen the demand has not fallen. I've been talking to people lately, and it appears that people are, even as they're sequestered away, they've been relying very heavily on delivery services and trying to get through dispensaries and get a supply for a period of time. But it seems as if I think people are starting to make a decision that maybe alcohol is not the way to go when you're sitting at home alone, and cannabis is. And so, do you think that there's a rise in the level of users of cannabis out there right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's anything that your average person can do to relax and unwind is good in general, as long as it's healthy, and especially during this time in life. There are starting to be some people looking at cannabis's effectiveness in preventing COVID-19. I'm sure you're familiar with. I know Forbes just released an article about it. There's research going in Canada, so that's really awesome. And I think that the fact that in so many states, and especially in Colorado, cannabis businesses have been deemed essential, I think is really, that's also boosting people's, comfortability with it, and kind of decreasing the stigma. I mean, it was when that shelter in place order went into effect in Colorado, it began in Denver, and initially they said retail cannabis would be closed, medical would stay open, but retail would be closed. There was such an immediate backlash that within 2 hours they came back on and said, no, these businesses will be deemed essential and will remain open.
Yeah, I mean, kind of, I believe, and I think like a lot of people who are in the industry believe and understand that, those who are seeking cannabis through a, not recreational, but I'd say adult use
Yeah,
outlet are literally self-medicating anyway. So I think the majority of people who turn into cannabis versus turning to alcohol are turning to that because they have some sort of underlying medical issue that they're trying to address, even if they don't know they're trying to address it.
absolutely. And stress and anxiety, and depression can be those underlying issues as well. And for me, and for so many people that I've seen, cannabis promotes a healthy lifestyle. I feel like many people that are users of cannabis almost push back against the stigma of cannabis causing an unhealthy lifestyle. And so, especially in a place like Colorado, where we have such a large outdoor, recreational scene, the mountains and hiking and camping and jogging and running and yoga and all that stuff. Like, these are all things that cannabis really enhances. And, I mean, it's you're much more likely to go enjoy a nice stroll if you smoke some bud.
What do you think of that recent article that was out? I was just trying to search it out myself. I couldn't find it in my any of my queues. But recent article where the federal government came out, and I think it was the DOJ came out and tried to have doctors state that anybody using cannabis is really only doing so because they should be included on a list of dangerous drug users. What do you think about that?
That's ridiculous. I mean, you've had such a healing experience with cannabis. I've had such a healing experience with cannabis. I mean, anybody that suggests it's either, they're still stuck in the reefer madness mindset, or they have the interests of pharmaceutical companies, the prison industrial complex, that's where they're coming from.
Yeah, it's been crazy that even literally has perpetuated itself. I just don't understand where this mindset is coming from, especially when it comes out of the mouths of people who will go to a event in the evening and bang down 3 or 4 cocktails.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I fortunately slash unfortunately, I have experienced very little pushback. And I say unfortunately because there are some times that I just really want to get into a heated debate with somebody about how healing and healthy cannabis is versus pretty much everything else, because the facts, especially with my particular case, are undisputable. I mean, the pictures that exist of me in when I was, using opiates are just such a night and day difference. The first time my wife went over to my parents' house, and met my parents, she said, "Who's this picture of your brother?" And it was a picture of me. It was just 90 pounds heavier and sickly looking. It's such a night and day difference for so many people, that it's there isn't a debate. If somebody disagrees generally, anything they state is not fact. It's been debunked, and anywhere they come from is either in the interest of big corporations that lose from cannabis, or just fear and paranoia that's deep seated in this culture.
So what's the next? What do you have anything new coming down the pike? What should we expect out of AlpineStash or out of Danny? What should we expect?
Yeah, our expansion is going to be big for us. That will allow us to have enough space and enough flowering capacity to actually have our product available on a consistent basis. As it is now, we have a harvest which takes about 3 months. We sell out pretty much immediately, and then usually waits another 3 months. So we're really looking forward to having more of a consistent availability of product. We're also looking to really kind of brand.
I'm sorry. Do you do indoor and outdoor grow yourself?
We just do indoors. Yeah, our license when we got in, there's not very many places in most cities around where we live to do outdoor grows. So we are indoor.
Okay.
Another thing we're looking to do is really brand some of our unique cultivars and sort of push that Lemmy Winks, Cookie Confundo, Orange Chemsicle, and related crosses with those. We have a lot of merchandise in the works. And then the other big thing that we're really passionate about is educating people on growing their own cannabis at home. And so to that end, we have a YouTube series which we're going to be doing more videos on that, so that people during this time, who maybe they need something in their life, a new hobby, they can be self-reliant with cannabis. They're at home. I mean, really for us, sharing our knowledge that we've gained and our passion for growing is really important, as is being transparent and empowering people to grow their own. So that's another big kind of push that we have in the works.
Absolutely. And how about it? What do you think is coming down the pike next for the Colorado's been leading the way. A lot of states have been trying their best to replicate. And I understand is Colorado. Did you just recently get a little bit of a tax break on product or no?
No.
Oh, I thought there was a discussion about lowering taxes in Colorado.
The consumer might, but on the taxes that we pay as a wholesale grow have definitely not lowered.
Okay, and now do you still see that is that going to eventually drive the business back underground?
I don't think so. We are taxed at a 20% rate for excise tax. I have mixed feelings about that. 15% of that excise tax goes to the state. A lot of that is for the enforcement of cannabis laws, and however, some of it is going for very good things, school and education and homeless shelters and things like that. And then 5% of our taxes is to the local city, and that we're all for, because especially during COVID-19, they need as much revenue as they can get, and we're happy to help enrich the community with our presence. And I don't think it's going back underground by any means. I don't think it's in anybody's best interest to increase taxes, and I think that the industry, for the most part, has learned to live with the tax rate that we have.
Great. Well, I got to tell you something. I know all of our listeners are probably really, really happy to have heard from you today, and happy to listen to your perspective. I can't thank you enough for having been a part of Let's Be Blunt with Montel. And again, you've been listening to Mr. Danny Murr-Sloat, who is the founder of AlpineStash in Colorado. So if you happen to be in Colorado visiting, or you happen to be there hunkered down trying to see if you can practice good mitigation techniques, if you send somebody out to a dispensary to pick up a product, make sure you pick up something from AlpineStash. So thanks so much, Danny, for being a part of the show today. I really appreciate the chance to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'd just like to point out, we do all of our release information on our Instagram. So follow us at AlpineStash, and you can check our website, AlpineStash.com. And if you want to learn how to grow, check out our YouTube channel. And it's been a pleasure talking to you. So thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. We'd love to have you back in a future date. So we'll reach out to you. And I can't say thank you enough for being a part of Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Make sure you tune in to the next Let's be blunt with Montel.